All right, continuing our study of the book of Exodus. Last time we left off with chapter 20. We're going to try to make it through 24 today, but I don't know how far we're going to get. Yes, sir?
And you remember the question you was going to ask?
I do. And you got an answer to it?
I do.
Okay. Well, and the question was, and correct me if I'm wrong, the question was, what commandment is the easiest to keep and what is the easiest to break? Okay. So we're going to read through the commandments and we're going to talk about them, and I want us to focus on that. Chapter 20, of course, is the account of God giving the Ten Commandments to the nation of Israel. And this really is the chapters we have with both the Ten Commandments given as well as the other laws that are given in chapters 21, 22, and 23 are really a critical point, almost a turning point in the life of the nation of Israel. Why is that? Okay, we know the history. We've had the history of the nation of Israel beginning with God's calling of Abraham. And we read the story of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and the children of Israel, how they wind up in Egypt. They're in slavery for 400 years. Then God uses his servant called Moses. He appears to him in the burning bush and he gives him certain instructions which Moses follows. The children of Israel are miraculously delivered from the most powerful army in the world. They're delivered by means of a miracle, the likes of which probably had not been seen prior to the flood or the creation, the parting of the Red Sea and the destruction of the Egyptian army. So here they are. God has brought them out to the wilderness, and he speaks to them from the mountain, from Mount Sinai, sometimes called Mount Horeb. And it's interesting that the day that he speaks to them and gives them the Ten Commandments is the day that became known as Pentecost. We think of Pentecost, as we discussed last time, as a New Testament phenomenon, but no. The people were gathered on the day of Pentecost. They were celebrating Pentecost, which was the day that God spoke to them from heaven on the very day that the Holy Spirit descended. And so now we think of Pentecost, we think of what? The tongues of fire. We think of the Holy Spirit indwelling God's people. But it began at this very time in the wilderness when God spoke to his people. Now, why I say this is a turning point, because as of the time that God gave the commands, nothing would be the same anymore in the nation of Israel. And a couple of things I want to discuss today and following are a couple of questions. Number one, what was the intended purpose of the law? And then, as Christians, what is our current obligation under the law? So we know the law was very important. I mean, to this very day, Jews believe that they're under obligation to keep the law, and they believe that their source of righteousness is the degree to which they are able to keep the law. So they measure their righteousness through, if you will, their ability, their success in keeping all the laws that were handed down by God. Not only the Ten Commandments, but also all of the other laws. And we see, one of the things as we read through the book of Exodus, we're going to see that there are different categories of law given. The law of Moses speaks of essentially everything we have here in Exodus 20 through 23. But we could break the law of Moses down into three components. One would be the moral law, which is given and embodied in the Ten Commandments. Then we have the second category is the civil law that's more or less laid out in Exodus 21 through 23 as well as other places. And then what's called the ceremonial law, which is expounded upon more in the book of Leviticus. So moral, civil, and ceremonial. We also gain further insight into the law in the book of Deuteronomy. We've studied that together. And we recall that one of the things that Moses made clear to the people on the occasion of his speech, if you will, his discourse in Deuteronomy. And remember, what was the occasion of Moses' speech in Deuteronomy? Where were the children of Israel? And what were they getting ready to do?
Crossover.
That's right. They had finished their 40 years in the wilderness. They're on the east bank of the Jordan River, and they're preparing to cross over into the promised land. We know that Moses wouldn't go with them, and so he's giving them basically his parting words, and he reminds them of the importance of the law, and he says, among other things, he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Everything you have, you should love the Lord. And he reminds them, remember, God has given you the law. God delivered you from slavery, and then he gave you the law. And he said that everybody who keeps the law will receive blessings. And he listed all the blessings, and they're wonderful. And then he says, anybody who breaks the law gets what? The curses. And the curses are horrible. And he says the curses will follow you around just like the blessings will follow you around. So the whole life, if you will, of the nation of Israel and the whole future of the nation of Israel is basically charted out and put into context, starting with chapter 20 of the book of Exodus, because here the laws are laid down, and here the people are given God's commands as to what they are to do and what they are not to do. And so I want us to study this and try to get a better feel for what the children of Israel must have been thinking, what they were thinking at the time about these laws, and then how these laws have changed, and again, what is our obligation under the law now? What is the purpose of the law insofar as we are concerned? Can we just ignore the law, or are we bound to keep the law? Can we measure our righteousness by the extent to which we are able to keep the law? Or do we measure our wickedness by the extent to which we break the law? So let's think about all those things. Let's talk about all these things as we go through. Exodus chapter 20. There's the prologue to this, I think, is very interesting and something that we should not pass over too lightly. It starts off, Exodus chapter 20. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am, there's his name again, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You read a lot in the paper these days about slavery. Whether we should continue to remember that dark period of American history which involved slavery, whether anybody who's ever supported slavery, if their name should be stricken from public buildings, if any monument, any statue that commemorates anybody who's in favor of slavery, should it be taken out of a public building. Kenny, you start to say something?
Yes, at this time, is God speaking to everyone or just to Moses?
Just to his people. At this time, is he speaking to everyone or just to...
Is this where they gathered at the base of the mountain and he spoke, or is this to Moses only? Moses has to return from the mountain. And
That's a good question, and I think, well, we'll read the context of that, because at some place he's speaking only to Moses, and some place he's speaking to everybody.
I didn't understand where he was at this time.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm going to answer that question in just a second, but let me make a point about slavery.
19 it says, so Moses went down to the people and told them.
And that's a good question. Let me make the point about the slavery. If you notice in essentially all of God's word, the children of Israel were never admonished to forget about their slavery, were they? They were always told to remember your slavery and something in particular about their slavery. And what is that? That I am the one who delivered you from slavery. In other words, he says, I don't want you ever to forget about slavery, because if you forget about slavery, you're going to forget that I'm the one who delivered you from your slavery. And that's the thing that we should always remember. Those who feel that they have been oppressed by slavery, irrespective of their race or whatever, I think God is speaking to them that they should not forget their slavery. They should remember the one who delivered them from their slavery. And that's what God is, he reminded the nation of Israel the way he's reminding each one of us that we should remember that he is the one who's delivered us from our slavery, right? And we were all at one point in time slaves to sin. And we were slaves to destruction, but God is the one who has delivered us. So I think he's admonishing us that we should never forget that we too were once slaves. For what reason? Because he's the one who delivered us. All right, backing up also in verse 24 of chapter 19 says, Then the Lord said to him, Go down and come up again, you and Aaron with you, and do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break forth upon them. So Moses went down to the people and told them. Okay, so that's our introduction. But then it says, Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And then he begins to give the 10 commandments. And if you read these commandments, if you put a number on them, you're going to come up with a number different from 10 more often than not. When I was a Lutheran, I learned 10 commandments, but it's in a little bit different order than the Baptists. But you're going to find here, if you read these commandments, you can come up with 11, you can come up with 13, you can come up with 9. But again, the number is not all that important. The substance obviously is very important. So
Seems like that to me that they hadn't heard him, when Moses stayed on the mountain, when they made the camp and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Like somebody might have would have spoke up what they should have been doing, if they knew the commandments then.
Were you talking about before this time?
No, when they made the golden calf.
Oh, that's later on.
But that's what I'm saying. They knew everything about it at that time.
Right, no doubt. And a lot of what we read last time, we know that the people heard, I think they heard God's voice. It says, Now Mount Sinai was all up in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire. That's in verse 18. And smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked violently. When the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder. And the Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mountain. There's a point that we read here that the people are so afraid of the voice of God that they almost want it to stop, because they're afraid if they hear the voice of God, they may die. But at least at that point in time, they're having a great deal of respect for God's voice. Okay, let's read these commandments, and then Tom is going to tell us which is the easiest to
No,
keep.
we don't have to. I'll raise my hand. I got mine too.
You got your two? Okay, I can't wait to hear them. All right. Tom, you want to start out reading for us?
I'll buy it.
All right, Pastor Troy, you want to read?
Okay, where we at, 4?
Read verse 3.
3?
Yeah.
Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Okay.
Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I am the Lord God, and a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy upon thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments.
Pause right there. Now, when I learned the 10 commandments, that was all a part of the first commandment. That is to say, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And the next part of it, verse 4, which is taken by some as the second commandment, this was thought of by the Lutherans as being just a part of the first one. So in other words, the first commandment says, you shall have no other gods before me. And then next it says, you shall not make unto yourself any idol or any graven image. And he goes on to say, you shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children under the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, but showing mercy to the thousands of them who love me and keep my commandments. So that's broken down. Whether you call that one commandment or 2 commandments, what is the point of that? First off, thou shalt, God says, as number 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Pretty clear. We'll talk about if that's easy to keep or easy to break, but then he says, you shall not make unto yourself any graven image. What's the purpose of that? No idols.
Well, that's another form of putting another God.
Yeah.
So that, to me, I feel like it's all in one.
It's something tangible.
Yeah.
I think you got to explain what he means by that.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that. You could think of it as just one, which is multifaceted. So God says, you know, I'm at the very top. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Then he says, don't make any idols or graven images or carved images or anything else of really anything, any fish, any bird, anything else. But he's saying two things there. As Warren said, he says, number one, don't create another image that you're going to worship. A lot of that was going on at the time, right? I mean, we all know about the, even was it Rachel had her little familial gods that they kept on the mantelpiece, and she stole some from her father. So God is saying, don't create anything that you're going to worship, but he's also saying there, don't try to worship me through any tangible thing.
Well,
You got that? Don't try to worship me through any tangible thing.
It might have been prophetic
Yeah.
to them of what's going to come.
No doubt, no doubt. But what's the significance? Why does God tell his people do not worship him through any tangible thing? First off, does that happen today? How does that happen?
Kathy just said it.
What's that?
Well,
What did you start to say, Kathy?
Mary?
the government.
Well, yeah, but not just Mary. Mary was a living thing, but how about statues of Mary? How many people worship today? They go into a church and there is a statue of Jesus on the cross, there's a statue of Mary, there's a statue of the apostles, and they actually worship those things.
Well,
God said, don't do
Say
that.
Paul, say this, say that.
The
Yeah,
golden calf that they made was, it wasn't a calf they were worshiping God. That's what he made it. We need an image, and that's what the insinuation was, that was God.
that's right. They said when they made this calf, and we're going to talk about that later on, Aaron told them, this is what delivered you out of Egypt. But think about, and that's a good point too, but think about what other things, what more subtle things do people worship? They worship God through a tangible thing.
Tangible or intangible? Because you can have intangible worship as well.
Well, you can. but-
Power.
That's right. But God says here, don't make any graven image, anything that Nancy makes a good point. But let's talk about tangible things first, okay?
What about the cross?
Yeah. I mean, if you actually, the cross, there's nothing wrong with the symbol of the cross unless you worship that tangible thing.
Yeah, they kiss it.
What about the
Yeah.
rod that Moses carried around with the people? When they
Yeah.
lowered it, they were looking at it and said, oh,
Yeah.
well, we're gone
Yeah,
now.
that's an example. What about today?
I want
Muhammad?
to ask a question though. When you say worship, do you mean like worship as somebody would worship as God? Or do they, like the cross, is it a memory of what Jesus did for us to abolish slavery of our sins?
Right.
But they maybe see it as a representation, a tangible representation of the Jesus that we can't see because he's in heaven.
Right.
So people are visual and they see the cross and they see that Jesus died for our sins.
Right.
And that Jesus is the Son of God.
Right.
And so, I mean, is that worship or is that?
Well,
It depends. It
Well, how
depends.
about this? They've got statues of Jesus. Okay, so are they praying to the statue?
Are they praying to the statue or are they looking to that and saying,
Right, same thing.
that's Jesus, because my aunt always had a picture of Jesus in her house. And I don't remember, but she says that's always a memory of what he did for me. It's a visual reminder of every day before I go to bed, I see Jesus. And so I'm wondering if there's a difference of like, okay, there's this tangible, and I'm praying, like maybe the Egyptians did when they prayed to Isis or whatever, that they're going and they're putting down things
Right.
for
Offerings.
offerings, thank you, for them to get something back from them. So when I see a cross, I don't necessarily think that I'm worshiping a cross, but I think of the memory.
Right.
But I don't go and put offerings at the bottom of the cross.
That's
No,
right.
but the Catholics, they use like the saints or Mary, they use them as an intercession.
It's an
For them,
intercession to
right.
pray to God for
Right, not
them, or
that they're-
to help them obtain
Right,
or
they're not
achieve
taking
their
the place
prayers.
of God, but it's as an intercession. Is that?
that worship? I don't know, but I mean, it's
That
just
form of
asking for
worship,
additional
sister.
assistance.
We have one.
You know what I'm saying?
So we
We
have
have
an
Jesus is
intercessor.
our intercessor.
Yeah.
No,
But
I agree.
I say it needs to be like a Watts line.
Yeah, but-
Instead of that, if you're asking people to pray for you to God for something, that we have a prayer board, or for the nation, rather, are we asking other people as prayer, as a group, or are we asking, is it any different than asking Mary or Saint Joseph or Saint Xavier or whoever to intercede and pray to God so that you get more prayers going into God's ear?
Yeah.
But these people are alive. The ones you're asking to pray for your loved one, they're alive,
But the other ones that are so-called saints or Jesus, or
but they're not.
they're in heaven.
Yeah.
Well,
Theoretically, you can tie it up all morning.
Well, I mean, you
Yeah.
have.
Yeah, we can, I don't want to spend too much time, but
But you
I
can
think. I think-
worship another
Good.
man, like I know people who worship their pastor, they think he does no
Right.
wrong.
That's a tangible thing, but God speaks here in terms of don't make anything, number one, that you're going to worship in any sense as another God, or don't worship me through a tangible thing. Why? Jesus said, God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. In other words, it is communication spirit to spirit. It is not as if, and there are many people, like Nancy said, you see a cross, you think of what's behind the cross. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with worshiping the
also-
Christ of the
it's
cross.
also
But if
a
you
symbol of
worship
Christianity.
that physical thing, that's when you're breaking the commandment. That physical
Right.
thing. If you revere that over the Spirit of God.
What if you think it has any power?
Exactly.
If you think this,
That's right.
That
That's
sums it
right.
up.
Well, if you're expecting something from a person instead of God,
Another example. Yep,
Or
another
put your
example.
trust in someone else instead of God.
this has been years and years ago, this lady, she was Catholic, so she called her father, it was a friend of our sister, and this lady, she, you know, she'd tell you anything that she heard from her kinfolks. That the lady was, I don't know, sick or having troubles, so she called the father. It was late at night, you know. She woke him up and talking to him on the phone, and he told her to tell, say, 3 Hail Marys, turn over and go back to sleep.
Yeah, yeah.
So that, to me, would be worship, and that's not,
That's an example too. All right, let's go to the next one, number 7. Is that you, Joanne?
Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain.
Pause right there. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. What does that mean? Many
God's name
examples.
is potent and should not be misused.
Yeah. The Jews took this. The Jews took this so literally that they would not even write the covenant name of God down, Yahweh. You see in their ancient writings, any time that God is referred to, his personal name is referred to, they would substitute Lord as opposed to Yahweh, because they were that fearful of misusing his name. Oh, that we could be that respectful today of God's name. But there are many ways to misuse God's name. Just, the cursing that we hear these days, that is a misuse of God's name. What is another misuse of God's name?
Mark off Christ for Christmas. To me, that's.
That can be, yeah, to leave him out. What else?
This might not be the right thing, but saying, God told me this.
Yep. Did you hear what Jackie said? That, when people declare, I have a word from the Lord, and they tell you something, and it's really not. That is misusing God's
I
name.
think of the little emoji, OMG,
Yeah.
and the kids send it all the time,
Right.
when they're saying anything.
Yeah.
I've questioned them,
Yeah.
really, is that, are you honoring God when you say that?
There you go. That's exactly right.
But it's in text now all the time. I don't know, your kids are always.
I'm making all of our kids alter that, O-M, gosh,
Mhm.
Yeah.
that when they,
Yeah, but it's a big deal
it
now.
is.
Yeah. I hear people misuse God's name all the time. I'm sitting in a deposition, the very beginning of it. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help you God? Yes, I do. And then what do? They start lying.
Yes.
That is a misuse of God's name. To say that I'm going to tell the truth and I invoke God's name and then I don't tell the truth. And what does he say? He says, you will not go unpunished if you misuse God's name. All right, verse 8. Can you read 8, or if you're going to read today, 8 through 11?
I'll pass.
Pass, Warren?
Remember remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you should not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within the gates. For 6 days the Lord made the heavens and on the earth, the sea and all that lies in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy.
All right, pause right there. So all that Warren read right there is considered the next commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But you'll see there are at least 2 commands there. One is to remember the Sabbath day. The next is to keep it holy. But also there's another command there. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. It doesn't say you may work on 6 days. It says you shall work on 6 days. And then on the 7th day, on the Sabbath day, you are to remember it and you are to keep it holy. Now, how does that fit into your categorization of the most difficult to break or the most difficult to keep? Well, first off, what is the Sabbath day?
Saturday.
Saturday. Yeah. And
So we are breaking the law every time.
And so what's supposed to happen on the 7th day, Shabbat, Saturday, the Sabbath day, is we are to do no work, but we are to remember what? Remember that God is our provider, and to remember that day that he created all that there is in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. And what did God do on the 7th day when he rested? When he looked out on all of his works, what did he say? He says, it is good. He says, it is very good. How much time do we spend? How many times on a Saturday have you done exactly that in your life? Has there ever been a Saturday that you stopped and you didn't do anything, you rested, and all you did all day long was to reflect on the goodness of God's creation and on his power and his providence? Wow. And then, the other side of this, in how many weeks have you worked 6 full days?
That's when I play hard.
Some have, and some of you ladies do a better job of that than some of us guys. I mean, some of you ladies, you work, just nonstop, 24/7. But to work 6 days continuously, that's a pretty tough job. It's a tough thing to work, to labor on 6 days, and it may be even a tougher thing to stop working on the Sabbath day.
Well, what's the difference between work and play?
Oh, that they were the same.
No, I mean, what I'm saying is a lot of people enjoy cutting grass or.
So that's what I'm saying, it's like, it's working, but I'm sitting on my mower and actually it's therapy for me. 'Cause-
Yeah.
But not on a Saturday.
I don't say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
I mean,
think,
is it?
there's a lot of things that the Jews thought were
But I
fun
enjoy doing it.
that they didn't do, that they would not do on the 7th day. I mean, they didn't work and they didn't play on the 7th day. What did they
But
do?
when
They
were
rested.
when they were in the
What God did.
wilderness though, he provided manna
That's right.
on the 6th day.
That's right.
Enough to last for the 7th day, and then he didn't on that 7th day.
That's right.
Whatever day of the week it is, but, we're looking at this from this time
Literally.
period,
Yep.
and, so much has changed when Jesus came, he died on the cross, he rose on the 3rd day, and I think that's why Christians go to church on Sunday, but, it's the whole, when Jesus came, it changed
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
on this perspective, because this is law. This is
Right.
the law. This is not,
That's right.
so it's a little different these days. But I also don't think when they say you work 6 and rest on 7, after Jesus died on the cross, it was you worship every day.
Well, that's one
So
of the,
there's a difference from when you're reading this in this historical period as compared to, you know.
of course, and that's the base for one of my questions, or two of my questions actually. What was the purpose of the law then, and then what is our current obligation under the law? And so what I want us to look at first is how difficult, if not impossible, it was to keep these laws. And in that context, what's the purpose of it? Now we've seen already that all of these laws as laid down were pretty difficult to keep, if not impossible to keep. Some more so than others. All right, let's continue on before we get into our discussion of the easiest and the most difficult. All right, number 12. Who's that? Sarah?
Honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God has given you.
All right, this is said to be the first commandment with promise. Honor your father and your mother, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long upon the earth. So we have a command, honor your father and mother, and the promise is that if you do so, what? You live long. Now, how easy or how difficult is that to keep? First off, what's the purpose of that commandment? Why does God say, honor your father and your mother?
Well, to me, it's a natural thing to begin with. But if you become disobedient and he's giving you land for these families, and they inherit land, so if you take yourself away from honoring your father or your mother, you could be disinherited and you wouldn't be a part of that land. I mean, you put the land involved in it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There's something else. Jack and I were talking about this yesterday. And it's particularly relevant in the context of what's going on in Baton Rouge. Is one of the big problems that we have, and that you see in these demonstrations, begins with a lack of respect for authority. A lack of respect for authority. And I'll submit to you that one of the reasons that that's going on is because in a certain segment of our society, they are not taught respect for authority, and it begins in the home. They do not honor their fathers and their mothers. Very often the fathers are not present. But that's the reason why God gave this, honor your father and your mother. He wanted every child to have a father and a mother, not two fathers, not two mothers. He wanted them to have a father and a mother, and he wanted the children to honor them, to respect them, and to obey them. Why? Because that's where you learn respect for authority. And this is all about learning respect and authority for God the Father himself. And the way you learn that is first through your parents, that you honor them. You do not disrespect them. When they give you a command, you do it. You don't ask why. And parents don't have to justify or explain to their children when they give them a command. If they're giving them commands in love, I tell you to do something, well, why? Because I said so. Just like God said,
Amen, I love those words.
I'm not giving you these. God didn't explain himself. He says, do this. Why? Because I said so. It's just that simple.
A little
It's just
side
what I
note
said.
from that, the black guy who played on the original Ghostbusters, and there were 3 guys and one of them was black. Well, he was interviewed this past week, and he didn't know who his dad was. His mother and his grandmother raised him. And so as he got a little older, he'd say, I want to know who my daddy is. And his grandmother says, you know who your daddy is. It's God the Father in heaven, and he's the best daddy any man could ever have. Do you hear me?
Wow.
And so she said all his life, that was her answer from his mother and his grandmother. I can't tell you who your daddy is, but you got the best daddy in the whole world. It's the God the Father in heaven. And if you can please him, you'll turn out to be a good man. And he said, I grew up. And he said, I went my little sideways for a while, but I came back quickly knowing that God the Father is all I need.
Yeah.
So some people do, even though they don't know their fathers, do it right.
Yeah. And this is a step. You shall honor your father and your mother. Why? Because it's a step in learning how to honor God your father. That's how you learn it in the beginning. Honor your father and your mother.
Well,
And as time goes on, as we get older, And as our parents get older, it becomes sometimes more difficult to do that as the roles reverse. But we are never relieved of that obligation. But again, remember the real purpose of it is that it is to begin with the children early on, learning respect for authority through their parents. It's like, remember when Jesus gave the example of the centurion? And he marveled at the faith and the wisdom of the centurion. And why was that? He says because he recognized that he was a man under authority. He says there's authority over him and there's authority under him. And he recognized the chain of authority, that when that chain of authority is recognized, then things happen, right? And that this is the same lesson that Jesus gave in the lesson of the centurion. All right. The next one, verse 13. Who's got that?
Jerry.
You shall not murder.
Okay. Just a few words. Now, people would say, well, that's a pretty easy, Thou shalt not commit murder. Okay. I've never murdered anybody, so I've done a pretty good job of keeping that commandment. But what did Jesus say about that?
If it's in your mind.
Yeah. Where is that? Matthew 5. He says, Matthew 5:21, you have heard the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court, and whoever shall say to his brother, Raka, or you blockhead, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court, and whoever shall say, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell.
Matthew 5.
Matthew 5:21 through 22. So,
They didn't have traffic.
so you're invoking the traffic exception. Uh-huh. Well, how about the general knucklehead
Right.
exception?
You knucklehead.
My son calls me the white Medea on the road.
Why?
Thou shalt not commit murder. Okay. Hopefully none of us have ever killed anybody else intentionally, but
Not yet.
have you ever been angry? Not yet. Have we ever had murder in our hearts? Okay. But taking it, what's the whole purpose of this commandment here? Thou shalt not kill. That was actually something that came down at the time of Noah. Remember? Early in Genesis, around chapter 6 or chapter 7, we studied this.
The ark is open, ready for inspection.
What's that?
I said the ark is open, ready for inspection.
Yeah, he says, in verse Genesis 9:6, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. Okay, so that was a commandment that was given long ago. Not only don't kill, but whoever kills, his blood shall be required. And why was that? The purpose of it is because man was created in God's image, and we must have respect for that. And we must have respect even for those who do not obey the traffic laws. And our respect should go so far as Jesus said, we can't even be angry with our brothers. We can't call them blockheads.
So laws do deter doing things if you abide by them.
What's that?
I said laws are good, they do deter actions if you abide by them.
That's the purpose of them, you're right.
You
All right,
can be
next.
angry but not sin.
Be angry and sin not, yeah. All right, so
Don't
look.
call him a knucklehead.
You think, well, but here, the point that Jesus was making is this. The whole purpose of this law is what? You think, thou shalt not kill. I can do that. I've been successful in doing that all my life. But Jesus says, wait a second. Have you ever been angry with your brother? Well, yeah. Have you ever called anybody a knucklehead?
Scoundrel.
Yeah. And so he says, if you've done that, yeah, scoundrels and scallywags, ooh, guilty. What does he say? You've broken that law. Why? Because you have dishonored the image of God in that person. Well,
Yeah, I've
And
often
that person
wondered,
may be a brother or a sister.
That's
We don't
right.
know it.
That's right.
often wondered what goes through the minds of the military, like especially the snipers,
Yeah,
who are giving specific targets.
yeah.
You know, that has got to weigh heavily on them.
Well, you know that's right. You know that's right. Okay, number 14. Johnny, Nancy?
You shall not commit adultery.
All right. That, you know, that's, you say, well, all right, that, if that just relates to the physical, I'm innocent, maybe so. Jesus said in verse 27 of Matthew 5, he said, you've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman to lust for her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. Wow. But you know what? It even goes beyond that, because Jesus says later on, he says, and Paul tells us too, that the whole purpose of marriage, and this is a law, thou shalt not commit adultery, is a law that sanctions marriage, the marriage that God has ordained. And what does Paul tell us about marriage? The purpose of marriage is to portray the relationship between Christ and the church. And so what the husband should reflect and show is the way Christ loves the church selflessly. So if the husband does anything selfish, he has broken this commandment. What is the wife's role in marriage? The wife's role in marriage is to demonstrate the obedience that the church should have to Christ and the respect that the church should have for Christ. So to the extent that the wife is disrespectful to the husband, that too is a violation of marriage and is a violation of that law. So you think, boy, I'm clear on this one. No, you're not. If you've ever done anything that would betray the purpose of marriage, which is to demonstrate the relationship between Christ and the church, you violated that commandment as well. Both from the husband's side, if his love for his wife is not totally selfless to the point that he would give up his own life to save her as Christ did for his church, and the same way, if the wife does not respect and love and honor the husband the way the church should respect and love and honor Christ, it's a violation of this commandment. Who's next? Number 15, Kenny.
You shall not steal.
Hold on there. Thou shalt not steal. Steal what?
Anything.
Anything.
They have insurance for that.
That's right. Got insurance for that. How far does that go? When you say thou shalt not steal anything.
Well, if you steal somebody's heart that belongs to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Steal material things or
Yeah. You remember, was
steal
it?
time from work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's, you know, one of the things that Malachi pointed out was that the people were robbing God. They were stealing from God. They were breaking this commandment. And how was that? In their tithes and offerings. So when God says, thou shalt not steal, he's not just talking about us stealing from other people, taking physical things. It can be other things too. But he's also saying, be careful that you don't steal from God too.
That would
Because
go
the
back
people
to-
were doing that as much as anything else.
That would go back to the Sabbath too.
Yep. Yep. Anytime you rob God of his honor, right? If you don't give credit where credit is due. And boy, there's a lot of that going on these days, isn't there?
Well, I was thinking when they were talking about the crosses, all these yahoos or whatever they are, they all gold chains and
Yeah.
crosses hanging all over,
Right.
and they don't, you
That's the
know,
bling, they gotta wear bling.
they don't know
Bling.
what it, really what it means, the cross.
That's true.
You know?
That would
And
be
they're
it.
using it in a wrong
Decorative.
way.
You're right. If the cross is only used for decoration, I think that's a sinful thing. I think that's taking God's name in vain to one extent. Okay, what's the next one? Kathy,
Let's see.
number 16?
Do not give false testimony against your neighbor.
Do not give false testimony. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor. How easy is that to keep?
Nowadays, it's the rap that they do. It's whatever they think is going to help them or right in their mind,
Yeah.
that's what they say instead of the truth.
Yeah. Any falsehood, any falsity that does any harm to your neighbor. If you say anything against your neighbor, and if the intent of it is to bring harm or shame upon your neighbor, that's a violation as
I
well.
have a little story with that one too. My neighbor on my right he lives in Texas, came home and he said, I think your gas meter's leaking, y'all need to get it checked. So we called the people to come out, they came and checked the gas meter. Well, we didn't know it, but their ruling is to check the neighbor on the right's gas meter and the neighbor on the left. Well, the neighbor on the left had the leak. So it cost him about $500 or $600. So his wife was so mad at us, she could hardly see straight because we had turned them in. So poor husband said, man, did y'all get it? And I had to listen to it. And we said, we're so sorry. We're not the ones who turned anything in other than our own meter. It was the neighbor on the right. So the next day he came back, he said, I told her who it was, so he got it. and I said, no, you got it again, because she got upset with us and then she was upset with her. So it's kind of a bit of false.
Well, I think sometimes God gives us different types of neighbors just to test us. We have, on one side we have a very good neighbor, on the other side we have a not so good neighbor. And God, why did you do that to us? I mean, this is a person who doesn't respect our property. Will come and park in our driveway and let his dog come and take our newspaper away, and then when he gives it back, he throws it right in the gutter so it gets soaked. I mean,
Put the basketball
yeah,
in there.
and
Give it to
left tools on top of my air conditioner so that the fan would get all messed up. And as Jackie said, just looking in the windows until we built the fence. Then got upset that we built the fence. But why? Why? Okay.
Well, when you're in a new job and they tell you, they train you how to do it and all that, when I first started with mosquito control, they tell you what to look for, what's causing the problem, or whatever. And if you're the person that's causing the problem and you don't do anything about it, the next guy that's trained and come along, he's gonna tell you the same thing, So this lady over off of Foster Road, they had horses and she would take the feed at the horses and bring it to the house, and put it out for the squirrels or whatever. Well, if you put something outside, you can't say, you can come eat it, and you can't come eat it. So, it's the first time I went to her house, and, boy, all of a sudden, she got real irate and upset. I'd give her what they told us to give out, and she had signed for it, and she got so irate, said, is that the same? They tell all you people the same thing, What the problem? It was the same problem causing it. She just didn't change her end of it, So we have to tell them again. She said, "Here," she threw the stuff that I'd given her back in the truck and says, "Give me that paper I signed." I said, "I'm sorry, but I can't give you the paper." So I just tore her signature off and I said, "Here."
Yeah.
That's the only thing I needed to do, I couldn't fight with the lady or nothing, but out of all the, I guess, 10 guys or whatever trained, they always trained the same way. I went to this lady, and I went back to her house, and I pulled up, and I looked, she's headed out the backyard, and her husband is across talking to somebody, I guess she had done looked out the window, and he come, I could see she was chewing on him as they was coming that way, and he come to the truck, and no problem at all,
Well, good example. Let's not get too far afield here. All right, verse 17. Who's next?
Is that me? Yes. You shall not cover your neighbor's house.
Covet.
I'm sorry. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or manservant, or maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
And that's the one I had the biggest problem with.
Covet.
Yeah.
How's that?
My neighbor's got the finest donkey you've ever seen.
Okay, shame on you. Shame on you. You think, And you know, coveting, you know, Warren's teasing, but coveting is one of the most difficult things, I mean, to keep. Why is it? Covetousness is at the root of essentially every dissatisfaction or depression that we as humans suffer. And what does that mean? Well, what it means is I'm going to get all down in the mouth because things aren't going my way.
That's what's happening right now.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. You think, well, all right, I'm satisfied enough that no matter how nice a donkey or a Corvette my neighbor has, I'm not going to covet that. I really don't want it. Well, anytime you want something different about your life than what God has given to you, you know, when you want your own way rather than God's way, you're coveting. What'd you say?
I just didn't want to give up my pity parties, and now you've
Now
done
you've done
now you've done it. So
If you're not satisfied with something.
All I can say is that you're doomed.
still may have them. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there are the 10 Commandments. All right, now tell me, which is the easiest to keep? And what's the most difficult to keep?
Well, since we've been through this here, none of them. I'm out.
You give up. You
I give them. I give them.
So if they're so difficult, then I mean, can anybody say that I have kept all these commandments from my youth?
No way.
No. I mean, how many have you broken just since you got up this morning? If they're so difficult to keep, then why did God give these to the people?
Put a guilt trip on you.
Put a guilt, yeah, that's the Jewish way, right? You know, like the Jewish mother-in-law, her role is to make everybody feel guilty. But, you know, what is the purpose?
To help us look for a way to be able to keep them all.
To keep them all. Well,
Way capital W?
Well, but
Way capital W?
No, and that's through Jesus.
Yeah.
you know,
I will say this, Rick, before we went through this here, the first one was the hardest to me before we went through all this here.
uh-huh.
And number 13, verse 13, thou shalt not kill, was going to be my easiest.
Be the easiest. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. But you know, it's not. Thou shalt not kill, as Jesus said, goes a lot deeper than just taking somebody's life. It's
Well,
just being angry.
and if you would go out and poll the people around, you would probably get 90% saying that it means bang, kill you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Worldly, you might be, you know, one person to person, you might be able to, but spiritually, there's no way.
Yeah.
Well, even if you wish somebody would go away, I mean, I think that that's probably just, in that too, it's like, you know,
Yep.
not necessarily that you would do it, but it's like, what was this when Obama became president, that some preacher or somebody was saying that there should be somebody take his life? I mean, wouldn't that be almost considered the same thing?
Yeah,
Kind of
absolutely.
wishing that somebody was dead. I'm not gonna do it, but I wish
Right.
somebody would go do it.
That's right.
Kind of
Same thing.
You
Wishing
better
somebody's
turn the
dead.
camera off right now.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Click it off. Cut that part
just
out.
wishing, you know,
Yeah.
it's like, or, you know, maybe they ought to go drop a bomb on the Middle East.
Right.
Well, isn't that the same thing?
And we've all thought that. And what does that show us? That we are all guilty of murder. I mean, the whole purpose of this, I think, the reason God gave this to people and gave it to us is to demonstrate that what? That we are sinful. We just cannot keep these commandments. And the biggest error
We try to, but we
Huh?
cannot.
Well, and we're about out of time, but I got to make this point. The biggest error is that the people said, you know, it's recorded in the Old Testament, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And the way that they said is that we have done it, we can do it, and we will do it. And God's shaking his head saying no. And you remember, even in the New Testament, we all remember the account of the rich young ruler, where the rich young man comes to Jesus and said, good master, what can I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus starts to recite, he recited a few of the commandments. And what does the rich young ruler say? He says,
Kept hold of it.
all of these things I have kept from my youth. And what does Jesus say? He said, your biggest problem is that you have deceived yourself. He says, you need to start over. You need to start from the beginning. Basically, he says, sell everything that you have and give to the poor, and let's start at ground zero. Because you have not, number one, you've deceived yourself into thinking that you have, and the point is that you cannot. You cannot do it. So what are we to do? God gave us these commandments. We cannot keep them, and therefore, under the law of Moses, what do we get? We get none of the blessings, and we get all of the curses. Except for what? Except for the good news.
New Testament.
In particular, this was a real eye-opening event for me when I read Romans 8, verse 4, actually 3 and 4. Paul says, "For what the law could not do, because it was weak because of the weakness of our flesh, God did, sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and as an offering for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh, in order that the requirements of the law might be fulfilled in us." Because remember, Jesus said, when it came to the law, he says, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to what? Fulfill it. And he did. And he is the one, Jesus is the only one who has ever kept all of the law, all of the commandments. And why did he do that? He did that so that the requirements of the law would be fulfilled in me if I believe in him. So to the extent that Jesus kept all the commandments, if I trust in him, it's as if I kept all the commandments. And that's the only way that I can. Are the requirements of the law still incumbent upon us? Yes, in the sense that if we break them, if we break the law, we will be broken by the law. But we must fulfill them in the only way that we can, that is to trust in the finished work of Christ, because he has fulfilled all the requirements of the law in us. Meaning what? What do you get if you keep all the law? You get all the blessings of the law. And God always intended for all of us to have all the blessings that were promised. The only way we do that is to keep the law, and since we can't, Christ keeps it for us. If we trust in him, then we get the blessing.